time has come for us as Arizona Republicans to admit the obvious and to start saying the quiet part out loud, which is that our party's nominee is not qualified for office, and that we need to vote for the adult in the room, and that is Kamala Harris.
It is time to put partisan loyalties aside and vote for the leadership that will truly represent the people we want to be in the eyes of the world. Character matters.
So that was Mesa, Arizona Mayor John Giles, along with former State Representative Robin Shaw, and they were saying the quiet parts out loud, and that is that Donald Trump is not the adult in the room. Folks, I have never in my lifetime witnessed what we're witnessing now with Republicans coming out for Harris. And what I mean by that is, when was there ever a time when we had, Republicans for Bill Clinton, or when we had, Democrats for George W. Bush? It's never, I don't ever recall anything like this happening. There may have always been one or two Democrats and one or two Republicans that disagreed with the sitting president. By the way, they weren't attacked and called rhinos. They weren't attacked and put down and made fun of and belittled by whoever the president was. But these are the times we're living in, and I'm so glad to finally see more and more Republicans coming out for Harris. It only helps her momentum. And I think it also points out to anyone out there at this point in the game who still may be undecided, and no, I don't know how that could be. But if you are, it's easy to look over now and say, you know what? We've got Donald Trump. We've seen his act before. We know what he's capable of, and we know what he's not capable of. And he's not capable of reaching out and bringing people together. And now his own party, more and more of them, is starting to turn on him. And I've got a couple of great clips right here from the former lieutenant governor of Georgia, Jeff Duncan. He knocks it out of the park, folks. We got to start all rallying together despite the political labels. Republican, Democrat, to me, that's out the window. Let's talk about Trump and what he really is about. So take a look at this clip from Jeff Duncan.
The former president went down. He actually spoke in the same arena that Kamala Harris did earlier in the week. And he certainly had his attack lines, many of them on Kamala Harris. But he also went after the sitting governor, who happens to be a Republican. Let's listen.
Your governor, Kemp, and Raffensperger are doing everything possible to make 2024 difficult for Republicans to win. Kemp is very bad for the Republican Party. He wouldn't do anything. He could have ended the travesty with a phone call because I did nothing wrong.
Kemp is your former boss.
We served together for sure. Brian Kemp has forgotten more about being a Republican than Donald Trump knows about being a Republican. Brad Raffensperger and myself included, we have done more for the conservative cause than Donald Trump has ever done. This is now starting to not be Donald Trump's problem. This is starting to be the Republican Party's problem. We have to call him out for what he is. He's a felonious thug who walks down the street and throws sucker punches at people like Brian Kemp, like African-American journalists, like John McCain, and the list goes on and on and on again. And the Republican Party is content sitting across the street watching it happen and not calling him out, not jumping into that fight and saying, you are wrong for us. This 10% in the middle, which now feels like it's growing to be bigger than 10% in the middle, that's going to decide this election, are paying attention. And I've never seen a human be more self-destructive than Donald Trump the last 2 weeks. He continues to do it over and over and over again. And when he loses, and the Republican Party finally catches their breath and wakes up and says, we need a GOP 2.0, there'll be some people around, but it's going to take time to fix. My hope is that Kamala Harris ends up being a blank canvas for us to be able to help work these new policies and new ideas into place. That's the risk I'm taking as a Republican voting for Kamala Harris.
Final word.
So let's stop and truly think about this for a minute. How many times have we said here on the channel, Donald Trump needs moderates and independents to win this election? He's not doing anything to appeal to them. He's doubling down. He picked a running mate who's out there doubling down on their extremism. So he's not appealing to independents and moderates. And then he goes into a state and he starts running down their governor, who is a Republican. What sense does that make? That is one of the stupidest moves that I've ever seen. It's one thing to divide the entire country. It's one thing to divide Democrats versus Republicans and never try to bring them back together at all. But then you go into your party and you start running them down too. And we need to point out, our side is unified. We're behind Harrison Walls now. On the other side of the aisle, yeah, they're rallying around, the cult is rallying around Trump and Vance, but the Republican Party is not unified. It was an absolute stupid move, and more Republicans are realizing that he's wrong for them. And I also agree with Jeff Duncan that It looks as though Trump is just absolutely self-destructing. And when he sat down with that kid, the butt sniffer, at that point in the game, I said to myself, is he trying to lose? Is he just trying to throw the fight at this point? Because that's how ridiculous he is. He is so over the top ridiculous that you would honestly think at this point in the game, maybe he's just trying to throw the fight. But I've got more clips here from Jeff Duncan, and I want you to take a look at this one. It's really good.
He also went after Governor Kemp's wife, we should note. How is all of this playing in the state of Georgia, in particular with Republican voters?
Not well for Donald Trump. Those words were not received well, and in my opinion are complete gross negligence for a Republican to pick on Brian Kemp and his record of conservative leadership over the last 6 years. I mean, he's done a phenomenal job through some of the toughest moments in time. I was honored to be able to serve alongside him for a number of years during that process. Look, it's not playing well for Donald Trump. I would beg to argue that this is now a huge turning point in Georgia, and there's really no way to say Donald Trump is going to walk away with Georgia. I think it's now back up for grabs, and if Kamala Harris continues to gain momentum, I think she wins Georgia and she wins a number of other swing states. Donald Trump cannot help himself. Those statements were not about being a Republican. They were about being a self-centered jerk, and they were about being somebody that was only addicted to the spotlight and not actually leadership.
So you really think Georgia's back at play now? Absolutely,
it's in play. The suburbs where I live, 30, 40 miles north of Atlanta, are disgusted with what they heard from Donald Trump. They're disgusted with the continued play after play after play, just trying to point to himself. I mean, just me alone, I've gotten a lot of pushback from Republicans about not supporting him and supporting Kamala Harris. But now I've started getting notes and text messages and phone calls from others like, I get it. I get it. This guy's reckless on a good day, dangerous on a bad day.
So Republicans are starting to understand why other Republicans are walking away. They're starting to get it, and they're realizing finally that people are so disgusted with Donald Trump's act. Imagine how stupid you have to be to go down to Georgia, start running down their governor, and then on top of that, start running down his wife. That might appeal to the MAGA cult. It might excite them. It might get him some cheap heat and some loud pops from the audience. But those cheap heats that he's getting and those loud pops that he's getting, that's not going to take him over the finish line come November. And he is absolutely self-destructing right in front of our face because he cannot help himself. Now, folks, one thing I want to talk about is this. I live in a very small town here in East Tennessee. I grew up right on the border of Kentucky, Tennessee, and Virginia. Grew up over on the Kentucky side, went to school there, moved back over here, been over here for the last 25 years. And it all feels like home to me, to be honest with you. All three states just feels like home because we're within 10 minutes of one another where I'm sitting. So when you are a liberal or a progressive in my part of the world and you vote Democrat and you say it out loud, you're for sure in the minority. People looks at you and goes, whoa, you know, Brando's a liberal, and he'll say it out loud because it's such a dirty word in this part of the world. So when someone like me says it out loud, it definitely gets people's attention, and they can't believe that I would think that way. And I can't count the number of times that I've had people say, do you really believe that stuff you're saying on the internet? Do you really believe that stuff you're saying on YouTube? And I'm like, yeah, and I always have. And to my friends who know me, they know I always have been this way. And they would all be like, yeah, Brando's been a liberal for as long as we've known him. But the point I want to make here is this. When I sat down in these chairs to do these videos and talk about this, I know to the people in my part of the world who have known me all my life, they're going, Brando's just a liberal. Of course he hates Trump. Of course he don't like Trump. He's just a liberal. Folks, to me, it ain't got nothing to do with being a liberal. It ain't got nothing to do with being a Democrat or voting Democrat all of my life. It's got nothing to do with Democrat versus Republican or progressive versus conservative in my mind. It's the threat that Donald Trump poses to democracy, and is the things that he says right out of his mouth. And we hear him say, no, it's not the media being mean to him. It's not black journalists being disrespectful and mean to him. It's the things he says. When Donald Trump stands up and says, if you'll vote for me one more time, if you'll just vote for me one more time, I will fix it so good you'll never have to vote again. You won't have to worry about voting again because I will fix it that good. When he goes out and praises dictators, when he talks about how they run their country, and he says that that's how we should be running ours, when he says he would like to be a dictator on day one and terminate the Constitution, I just want you to know that my lifelong affiliation with the Democratic Party is not why I'm speaking out against Trump. I would be doing the same thing had it went the other way and I voted Republican, because democracy matters to me, the Constitution matters to me, and basic human decency matters to me. And Donald Trump has none of those things. Donald Trump is not a decent person. He is a bully. He is a con artist. He is a grifter. He is a blasphemer. If you want to take it into the religious side of the argument, I would argue all day that Donald Trump is one of the biggest blasphemies against Jesus Christ that I've ever seen in my life. So you got to understand something about me. I got up and walked out of a church back in 2002 because the minister back then I felt was getting too political back then. And I couldn't sit there and watch him talk about George W. Bush and put him over. I couldn't watch him do that in 2002. So I walked away then, and I would have done so, be it Republican or Democrat, because I can't be for cruelty. I can't be for something that's blatantly wrong, and I will not sit there and be guilty by association. I will get up and walk out. I walked out of that church 22 years ago now, and I never plan on setting foot back, because now that minister is full blown in the Trump weeds, and he preaches that from his pulpit. And I really believe that if there's any truth to the Bible at all, that Donald Trump is the biggest blasphemy that's ever been. And he's just an absolute, he's no one that you would want your children to pattern themselves after. He's no one that you would say to your kids, yeah, that's a good man, look up to him. He's not a strong leader. He is a self-destructive leader. He is a chaotic leader. He thrives on chaos. And so to me, I know people would say, well, that's just Brando, the town liberal, going off on Trump. It wouldn't matter about the political parties. It wouldn't matter whether or not I believed in a God or not. What matters is what I see Donald Trump say and do. And there's no way that I could vote for it. And there's no way that I could stay quiet any longer. All I had to do was just keep going down to the bar, sitting down on a bar stool with my acoustic guitar, and just keep singing some Hank Jr. covers and Waylon covers. And I could have did that for the rest of my life, stayed quiet, left good enough alone. And I know there's a lot of trolls watching at this point in the video, probably go, we wished you had of. But it became too important to stay quiet. And I'm seeing more and more people, and it ain't about Democrat and Republican. I'm seeing more and more people start to speak out now and say, yeah, we can't get behind this. I've saw it on my timeline. I've saw it in social media so much. People, I'm like, whoa, this guy is talking politics. This girl over here is talking politics. Never heard them do that before. But folks, they ain't talking politics. They're not talking Democrat versus Republican. They're talking about human decency and democracy versus just complete and total carnage. And so I'm glad to see more and more Republicans coming out for Harris. And, once we have Donald Trump out of the political arena, I'm sure that we will be disagreeing with Republicans again. I'm sure I probably will be. I know that, there's a good chance when all the dust is settled, Jeff Duncan, Adam Kinzinger, different ones, Liz Cheney, Paul Ryan, I'm still going to be disagreeing with them because my views align more with the Democratic Party. But as long as I know the person on the other side of the aisle is for democracy and they're not cool with dictators, then I can be cool with them.